I'm going to start by listing some models or some things that I think about when I think about the idea of models, and then I'm going to get to more analyzing them and describing the things that I think are interesting about them. So let's start with this first slide of models. There are some models, I think, that can sort of be grouped under the rubric of plans. For example, lesson plans, the Marshall Plan, game plans, plans of action, health plans, regional growth plans, God's simple plan of salvation, college savings plans, game plans, beverages plan for Social Security, which is, that was sort of a 1940s British plan for social welfare, if you haven't heard of that one. 5-year plans, floor plans, buying on the installment plan, city planning, family planning. So let's go on to a few more models. I think some other models can be thought of as systems, or oftentimes I think if you hear something called a system, that's a good way to be like, that might be a model. For example, systems of belief, multi-party systems, life support systems, the honor system, free enterprise system, filing systems, the feudal system, the early warning system, coordinate systems, and that by that I mean polar coordinates or Cartesian coordinates, ways of describing two-dimensional space. The buddy system, the Bertillon system, which was that was an early criminal identification system. Before they had fingerprints, they used to measure people's lengths of their arms and faces and everything, and that's how they would. That was sort of believed that was a unique way of describing a criminal. The Stanislavski system, operating system, solar systems, concurrent versions system, the University of California system, and of course, all the other states have similar systems. The International System of Units, or SI as it's called, the Dewey Decimal System, the metric system, the Bell Telephone System, Federal Reserve System, of course. And there are a few more systems I just want to get to here. The Selective Service System, the Columbia Broadcasting System, the Zone System of Photography, some of you are probably familiar with that, the Immune System, the Nervous System, the Digestive System, the Ptolemaic System, which was cosmology, a way of thinking about the planets and the stars, and that was a sort of geocentric system where the Earth was at the center and things revolved around it, as opposed to like a Copernican system where the sun is at the center and the Earth revolves around that. So both ways of modeling the universe. System of checks and balances, fighting the system, get it out of your system, the zip code system, 12-tone system, Dido point system, that's a typographical measurement system, and of course emergency broadcast system. So there's a few more, I don't want to try your patience too much, but I feel like there's a lot of really important example models that I want to lay out. So let's talk a little bit about some models that you can think of as methods, like the Socratic method, the scientific method, the rhythm method, the Montessori method, the Feldenkrais method, the Pilates method, method acting, methodism, Euler's method, the Suzuki method, which is a method, a musical learning and teaching method, and of course the mouth-to-mouth method of resuscitation. And then let's move next to theories, recapitulation theory, and then germ theory, Darwinian theory, speech act theory, theory of relativity, critical theory, theory in practice, auteur theory, the domino theory, and we'll get to that one a little later on when we start analyzing some of these systems and seeing what makes them tick. And of course the trickle-down theory of economics. I think another important category of models that you probably think about when you first think of models, right, is models that model people. So that's what I'm going to sort of summarize here. On the left, I have models that sort of model a person's body, and then on the right, I've got a number of models that are ways of modeling a person's behavior or their sort of relationships with other people, like fashion models or supermodels. Those are sort of super fashion models. be a model or just look like one. Model citizens, role models, reenactments like historical reenactments, tableau vivants, mannequins, dress forms. And then on the sort of models of persons that are more sort of abstract about how people act, these are just a few of many examples you could probably come up with on your own. Employment, contract, stock option plans, retirement plans, wills, court orders, warrants, report cards, insurance policies. So passing from people, let's talk about biological models more generally. Of course, you've got zoos, social Darwinism, that sort of a biological model transposed to a person model, aversion therapy, psychotherapy, physical therapy, homeopathy, heroic medicine diets, the gay hypothesis, and this is another model that we'll come back to and use later on when we're analyzing models. Exercise programs, training bras, stuffed animals, clinical trials, taxidermy ecosystems, Wild West shows, molecular models, model organisms of all sorts, artificial legs and dentures are just two examples of model body parts, all sorts of prostheses that simulate or model legs or teeth or things like that. Heterosexuality and homosexuality, of course, are models of desire and behavior that try to sort of describe perhaps accurately or inaccurately what's going on. The chain of being, Skinner's box, that's a model where you sort of train animals to respond to stimulus, named after B.F. Skinner, the famous behaviorist. And finally, mock turtle soup, which is sort of a model of a turtle, I guess. The next category of models that I want to quickly move through are games or toys that I'm going to put under this rubric amusements. And those include popular models that you've probably all experienced and played with in your life, like model airplanes, model ships, radio-controlled models, model railroads, ships in bottles, model rocketry, action figures, which are sort of dolls, but that's the term that you use when you sell them to boys. Yeah, and then of course there are dolls, and there's Little League, which we'll talk about later, which is a model of Big League, I guess. That's one way of thinking about it. Role-playing games, video games, video poker, documentary films, game theory, and school dances. So there's just a few more models that I want to hit when I'm covering this sort of survey before we get into analyzing them. And these are the architectural models, and these were some that got me kind of thinking about what modeling is all about and how models work. For example, there are the foam core models that you might see in an architecture office, or you might build if you're an architecture student. Then there are also the less physical, but the more, again, the sort of more behavior models of architecture, like urban planning, model homes, white flight, gentrification, tourism, feng shui. There are also wild animal game farms, summer camps, shanty towns, SimCity. That's, again, another model of architecture that we'll talk about a little later. World's fairs, virtual reality, Little Italy. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there. We could do this whole evening just listing models, but we're pressed for time, so I want to move on to talking about what is it that makes a model. What do these things have in common? Well, I'm going to look at models from sort of two different points of view. One I'm calling the pessimistic point of view, and that is a way of thinking about models as systems of control. Like if you think of the domino theory or manifest destiny, those are sort of models that are used to control either domestic or foreign peoples in certain ways. And report cards are models of behavior that are used to control students, and the Dewey Decimal System is a model of information and categorization that's used to control books and information, not only just to physically locate it and divide books up within a library, but also to say what they're about and sort of describe what they cover. And then, so that's the sort of pessimistic view. And then I think there's also, on the flip side of that, there's also a more hopeful view of models, and that is to think about, if you think about something as a model, I think it opens up this idea to realize that there's some possibilities for fun or play involved. And I think some example models that help us think about that are Little League and model rocketry, which are both sort of playful models of bigger, more serious endeavors, and drag shows, which are more playful model of, I'm not sure exactly what they're a model of, but they're a playful simulation. I guess I'll say that. Okay, so let's start with looking at some of these features of the sort of pessimistic view. You might, when I was going through that list of models, you might say, well, Amos, you're just saying anything is a model, you know? Basically anything that's involves some kind of representation. But I think the sort of key, what makes a model different than any other type of representation, is this idea of instrumentality. And what I mean by that is that modeling isn't about representing the truth of something, right? It's not about, you don't make a model of something just to know what that thing is, but you make a model to control it as a form of engineering, to describe how it works in such a way that you know how to take it apart and put it back together, or change variables to sort of control the outcome to your goals. So how do you do that? Well, the main way that you sort of perform this engineering is by simplifying something. So there are two examples I've given here, like child psychology and aeronautical physics. And you can think child psychology is a sort of model of the interior experience that a child has, but it's not about like trying to do justice to the full texture of that. It's about simplifying the sort of drives of a child so that you can get some purchase on their behavior, right? So you can figure out how to get them to not scream when you don't want them to. So it's about engineering, basically, simplifying to engineer. And the same thing with aeronautical physics. That's a way of describing what happens when something flies through the air, like a bird or an airplane. That's not about describing the full richness of that experience, the sort of beauty or any other things that are involved in flight, but just the way that air moves over a curved surface, for example, and the lift that's produced. Okay, so how do you simplify? What's involved in simplifying? Well, to simplify something, you need to remove parts of it. And that's what I want to talk about here in this slide, feature removal. Models are not complete, right? A model, if you had a map that was, you know, one-to-one scale, that would be no different than the territory itself. To be a model, you have to remove things. So that's what simplification is all about. And how do you decide what to remove? You sort of remove the parts that are unneeded for your particular application domain. So if you think of false teeth, for example, as a model of real teeth, when you're making false teeth, it's not necessary to include all the things that real teeth have, like plaque or cavities. I don't know, maybe false teeth have plaque, but they don't have cavities, definitely in the same way, and they don't probably make the same noises when you click them together. They don't have all of the things that real teeth have. Same thing with Little Italy. It doesn't have all the things that real Italy has. It doesn't have the same climate or government or, you know, there are any number of things that's lacking. But it keeps some of the same features of Big Italy, like Italian restaurants, or I don't know, the things that you could take pictures of, maybe if you're on a trip. And wild animal game farms are another example of removing things that are sort of unnecessary. They have the wild animals, which are sort of fun to look at, but they don't have things like, I don't know, freedom or a natural life cycle, or definitely the same type of climate and as an actual animal habitat would have. So this last bullet point is just reiterating this idea. How do you remove things? You remove things that are not relevant to your application domain. And what I mean by that's just sort of a fancy way of saying what it is that you're interested in controlling. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit more about what happens when you simplify something. What happens when you remove parts of something? Well, in a very real sense, when you simplify something and remove parts of it, you do violence to that thing. And there's a lot of different levels that can happen on. In this first example, taxidermy, that's a way of modeling an animal, but removing its life, basically, right? You're removing all its internal organs, and you're removing its life. So that is an actual, violent simplification of an animal, and that hurts. But there are also other ways that modeling is also violent or can cause problems. If you think about it, when you model something, I think the example of a toy or the idea of toying with something gives you some sort of insight into how modeling works and the sort of mindset of the modeler. If you think about the way you might control a toy or throw it around, or the idea that you might be toying with someone, that means you are simplifying them and sort of manipulating them for your own sort of amusement, basically. And that process, that can be painful, and it also can be demeaning. Because if you think of, this example here I have of the plastic dinosaur, a little model dinosaur, that is a extremely emasculated dinosaur. That's a dinosaur that is small and powerless, and that really you're taking away all of its ability to harm you in any way or to exercise any of its own volition. You are establishing yourself as in control of that dinosaur. And there's a lot of other ways too that modeling can be demeaning. If you think of some of these two other examples, lingerie modeling or SimCity, those are models that are about glorifying or sort of flattering the modeler. Like lingerie modeling is sort of a model of intimacy, I guess, on some level, but it's not one that's about reciprocity. It's one that's about sort of creating a simulation that's flattering to the person who's creating that model, funding that model. Same thing with SimCity, I think, or a lot of sort of computer simulations. Those are models that are about sort of pointing out, in some ways, the omniscience and the omnipotence of the person who's pressing the buttons and imagining themselves as the sort of master architect and watching their simulated people run in terror as they raise taxes and bulldoze parks or whatever it is that you decide to do. But in any event, it's all set up to sort of put you in this place of power where you can just sort of control things and watch them run. So given that kind of bleak prognosis or sort of description of models, I want to now talk about a few other things about models that I think show other sides besides just simple repression of what's going on. For example, we talked about, okay, models simplify things by removing stuff, and that hurts. But also, because models remove things, they also introduce this sort of place where extra things can be introduced. And I think the example of G.I. Joe is a good one to illustrate this. G.I. Joe is things that real GIs and real people have, right? But G.I. Joe also has some extra things that aren't in the case of original soldiers. Like in this example, I'm saying Kung Fu grip, whatever that is. I don't know. It's something that real people don't have. But he also maybe has other things, too, like arms that can move in strange ways that real people's arms can't move, or with strange plastic suits, or the ability to fire plastic, I don't know, missiles out of his head, or whatever it is that he can do. So not only is it removing elements from the sort of reality, but it's also adding new and interesting elements that weren't sort of available in the sort of scenario that was being modeled. So we can say that while engineering is the sort of goal, there's always a little bit of excess that can creep in. And I think another example is model United Nations clubs that they have in schools. Those are like the real UN in a number of ways. You know, people choose to pay attention or not pay attention to their resolutions depending on how it fits the situation. But there's other things that they have that the real UN doesn't have, like, for example, the delegate from Canada may have a crush on the delegate from Uruguay, and that may bring that delegate from Canada to the UN every week and provide a certain kind of texture and interest that the real United Nations doesn't have at all. So it's not just a bad copy of the UN, it's its own thing that has its own interesting elements that are absent in the original. sort of following up on that idea, I think, is the idea that since a model is not a perfect copy, there is the possibility that more than one model can describe the same scenario, right? Because a model just takes a sort of subset of features and says, okay, this is the essential parts. Well, it's possible you could take another subset of features and say those are the essential parts. So to give an example of the current war, there's a number of different models that people use to describe what's going on, to talk about what's going on. And one of those models, for example, is that this is a war of liberation, right? Another model is that it's a hostile invasion. And there could be many other models that describe what's going on too. So any given scenario, it's possible that you have multiple models that are worked out that you can use to describe what's happening. And because of this, you know, we said models are about engineering in some ways. If you think about the fact that a scenario is open to being described by multiple models, it may be that the control that a given model exerts over a scenario is only partial. One thing that I've thought about at my work at different times is the way that my boss might have a model of what's going on that's about an economic model, right? About how much they pay me and then how much they resell my services for and what sort of profit they're earning on that. But I might have another model that also I think is valid and has some ability to describe and control what's going on, and that model might be based on my friendships and my alliances and the people that bother me at work, and the office supplies that I like and the ones that I don't like, and you know, a whole host of different ways of describing what the important things are that are going on and what the important action is that's happening at my work. So there's multiple models that can describe what's going on. In addition to the ability to have one scenario that's described by multiple models, I think there's also another important way of thinking about how models can work, and which is the idea that a given model can be misapplied or reapplied to another scenario, right? So instead of having two models for one scenario, you can have one model that can be applied to many different scenarios. And the Gaia hypothesis that we mentioned earlier is an example of that. That's a sort of model of the Earth that thinks about the Earth as though it's an organism rather than geology. So it's a misapplication, or a reapplication, if you will, of a way of thinking about how systems work that applies a biological sort of organization to what otherwise could be described as a geological organization. And the second model here, this, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say the sexy robot model, just to sort of describe this. I feel like there's this kind of trend in society nowadays, what with, I don't know, everyone being into computers and internet, and everyone is sort of, there's a lot of fetishism of machines and technology, I think, and especially robots. And that's a way of sort of describing applying a sort of model of desire or human interactions and taking it and using it to describe a human-machine interaction. So that's sort of an interesting application of one way of thinking about behavior or relating to something and transposing it from a human-human world to a human-machine world. Okay, so why are these misapplications interesting? Well, I think they're interesting for two reasons, because they tell us something about the application domain and also about the model itself. So to get back to the idea of a sexy robot, that tells us something about the application domain, robots, in other words. It tells us maybe they are sexy. Maybe it is that machines have a certain grace or, I don't know, a perfection that is desirable in some ways. But it also tells us something about desire itself, or the sort of model of attraction, or what sexiness is. If you can have a sort of inanimate machine as the object of desire, what does that really say about what desire is all about? I think that that sort of opens up some perspectives on you know, human-human relationships maybe that we wouldn't have if we didn't reapply that model elsewhere. So that's about all I have time for this evening. So let me just wrap up by trying to recap a few of the points that we covered. I think modeling with this huge list of models, I think the sort of point I'm trying to make is that modeling is an interesting trope, I think, that you can use to describe all sorts of different diverse situations and scenarios that you can run into in your own life and in the world around you. And I think it's a useful or sort of a fun trope for two reasons, and those sort of corresponding to the pessimistic and the optimistic view. Number one, by looking at something as a sort of system of modeling, I think it helps you think about what the sort of power dynamics are, or what the sort of power relationships are that are going on in this scenario. But also, by thinking about something in your life as a system of modeling, I think it helps you realize that maybe you can swap out a different model for the model that you've been sort of assuming as the operative model. And you can maybe think about, well, this is just a model of what's going on. Maybe I can have a little fun with it after all. Maybe it's not necessarily only this way. Maybe there are other ways to describe what's happening. So that's sort of what I mean by this last bullet point is I would encourage you to, if you remember this performance or think about it, maybe just try to, you all should have gotten this little pamphlet, hopefully, with your program where I sort of summarize some of these models. Maybe keep this pocket reference in your pocket and take it out and refer to it at some point if you're just wanting to identify some models around you, or maybe just start your own reference of models. Just write down, just keep a clipboard maybe and identify certain things that you think about as models, and then think about ways that multiple models can apply and that maybe there can be a little more play or a little opportunity to misapply some of those models. So I'm done. We don't have, unfortunately, time for question and answer right now, but I and other folks will be available in the lobby after the show if you want to come and talk to me or ask questions. I'd love to answer your questions on models or anything else. Okay, thank you very much.